Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We got our first virtual wave there. If you're new to the program, we keep track of waves, whether it's on Market Street, people walking by, or online and at that phone number. Okay. First of all, that's right. I received a couple great comments over the weekend about some things that we talked about last week. Let's go to the first one here. I'm glad for the pushback about ending fossil fuels. Well, this is a topic that we discussed last week. California is the mecca of everything electric, yet is known for the rolling blackouts. That's a very good point. The current technology can't support everything electric. Yes, the grid is not there. The capability is not there. I've been a professional electrician and electronic technician for decades. To convert my 3-unit apartment building to all-electric heat, I would need a new 400-amp service, around $5,000, plus new panels and wires for each apartment, about $3,000. Next, new heater wiring, 3 electric mini-split HVAC units, I'm a little out of my territory here, about $15,000, total of $23,000. Rent would need to go up. Another addition to the cost, absolutely. We continue with the comment. Multiply the cost of upgrading to the electricity needed to replace natural gas energy, super cold winters, electric vehicles, 100-unit apartment buildings, hospitals, businesses, schools, etc. Add all the solar and wind you want. When it's 35 and below in the New York winters, it's not a matter of if the power goes out, but when. And that's been the real fear. It's something we talked about with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano as well, that it's not hyperbole to say that it will lead to deaths, especially in areas like ours, more rural areas. Final comment here. In their surveys, annual cost for electric heat is $5,000 compared to annual cost for natural gas heat at $2,000. That's the math that should wake up your checkbook. Yes, obviously, and thank you for that comment. That was great. Could not agree more. The costs, first of all, even set aside the costs, like you said, the infrastructure is not there. We are not there yet. And just wishing it to happen doesn't make it happen. So thank you to those comments, for those comments, excuse me. That ties in when we talk about costs, as tomorrow is Halloween. If you have not purchased your candy yet to give out to the trick-or-treaters, U.S. consumers are dealing with double-digit Halloween candy inflation for the second year in a row, with prices being an average of 13% higher this month compared to last October. According to the tracker, the Grocery Price Index, high inflation drove a national increase of 19.9% last year across the candy and gum category. So an additional 12.8% increase from October of 2022 through October 7th of 2023, quote, makes for more of a trick than a treat for consumers. A small business owner told ABC News, the price of candy has gotten to be outrageous. It doesn't make sense to me to spend $100 on candy. And I would say I noticed it last year. You may have as well. A lot more porch lights off, curtains drawn on Halloween night. So, not to start with doom and gloom, but something I thought worth mentioning. We're going to talk about Israel when we come back. Of course, at any point you can weigh in. Let me put my contact information up on the screen. Please weigh in at any point during the program on these topics and more. Are you going to give out candy for trick-or-treat? I know there's a big event, I guess you'd call it, big trick-or-treat event here on Market Street. As a matter of fact, I thought I had that I could show you on the screen. But when we come back, I'll give you more information about that. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. Well, it's a rainy day on Market Street, as you can see. So I did find that information for you. Corning will be having their trick-or-treat event here on Market Street from 4 till 6 p.m., tomorrow. So there is that information. All right. So fierce clashes in Gaza as Israeli forces expand the ground offensive. This coming out of Reuters. Palestinians in Gaza reported fierce air and artillery strikes early on Monday as Israeli troops, backed by tanks, pressed into the enclave with a ground assault that prompted more international calls for civilians to be protected. That is a common media talking point, very often blaming the victims. Israel has been precise. It's not as if they want civilians to be hurt. But it's a talking point you'll hear over and over. Israel's military said it had struck over 600 militant targets over the past few days as it continued to expand ground operations in the Gaza Strip, where Palestinian civilians are in dire need of fuel, food, and clean water as the conflict enters its fourth week. Now, and this is something we really have to pay attention to. We've talked about China. China seeing at first our weakness when we withdrew from Afghanistan, and now they see our involvement with Ukraine and with Israel, and they're starting to see, who knows, a window there to go after Taiwan. It's something we've talked about extensively on this program. Well, a top Chinese military official on Monday slammed certain countries for, quote, deliberately creating turmoil, hinting, without directly saying, the United States. Quote, as we look across the world today, hotspot issues are arising one after another. The pain of war, chaos, and turmoil, and loss of life are constantly playing out, said Zhang, one of China's most senior military officials. However, some countries, for fear that the world may stabilize, deliberately create turmoil, interfere in regional issues, interfere in other countries' internal affairs, and instigate color revolutions. For the sake of their own selfish interests, they bury nails everywhere. They create many artificial geopolitical conflicts, then preach impartiality while actually favoring one side, making regional situations complex and intractable. Behind the scenes, they hand out knives and think nothing of provoking people into wars, ensuring that they're the ones who benefit from the chaos. China making, I guess you could say, almost veiled threats. It's something that we have to keep in mind. I know we talked about it quickly last week, but we've talked about it extensively with actually former Congressman Tom Reed on this program about the real threat of China. And now it's feared, this coming from Bloomberg, that we have overextended ourselves with these global conflicts. And we talked about it when it comes to munitions, something as simple as munitions. But Biden came to office declaring America is back, now facing hot wars in the Middle East and Ukraine and a simmering Cold War with China. The U.S. is beginning to look overextended. The U.S. defense industry, Biden's arsenal of democracy, is struggling to produce enough artillery shells to ensure Ukraine can keep firing them at Russian forces. The Pentagon is bombing targets in Syria as it rushes air defenses to the region to protect troops in case Israel's war against Hamas prompts new attacks by enemies. Taiwan, another American ally, has stepped up orders for American weapons as China confronts it over strategic sea lanes. This is all, you tie this all together, is very scary. And, I was talking to somebody about this. I won't mention names. It's just a private conversation. But do you feel, I'll raise a question to you, do you feel that Biden is the right man for the job at this point? I think that's a fair question. A lot of people are asking. So what are your thoughts? And then we have like Van Jones, who mentioned that, okay, so we're going to give him essentially 5 more years because he has another year next year. Then if you vote to reelect him, that's 4 more years. And what Van Jones's argument was, you may like Grandpa, is what he called him, the Grandpa figure, but do you want to put your grandfather in this kind of stressful situation for 5 more years? But you can find that piece, again, allies fear U.S. is overextended as global conflicts spread. We've got more to talk about on this, some scary anti-Semitic attacks as well over the weekend that we'll mention, one hitting close to home in Cornell, threats. So we'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Looks like I might need to get a squeegee there. Kind of a trippy look at Market Street this morning. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I am your host, Frank Acom. Thank you for joining us. A good point during break. Did you know that in the Philippines, they require a fingerprint that leaves a stain on your finger to vote? Yes, you have to be fingerprinted, essentially, when you vote. The simple solution for us in the United States, it's indelible ink. It's a good point. You'll see people walking around, then you'll know who voted and who didn't. But obviously, we've talked about this a lot in the past. But the real threat of voter fraud. But I want to continue with Israel here. House Speaker Mike Johnson, the new speaker, aims to pass Israel aid package this week, and it's specific to Israel. It's not paired with Ukraine. This is going to set up a showdown between the House and the Senate, as well as with President Biden, because they want an overall package. We're going to move a standalone Israel funding bill this week in the House, said the newly elected House Speaker. And this was on Sunday Morning Futures on Fox. We believe that this is a pressing and urgent need, and it had been said that this would be one of the first things that he did as Speaker. President Biden had sought to pair Israel and Ukraine funding in order to increase the odds of wrangling additional Ukraine aid through a skeptical GOP-controlled House of Representatives. The White House rolled out a sprawling $106 billion supplemental package earlier this month, seeking $61.4 billion for Ukraine, $14.3 billion for Israel, $14 billion for immigration enforcement, and $16.55 billion for other issues such as Taiwan. Now, Johnson had previously teased plans to pursue $14.5 billion for Israel, a notch higher than what President Biden had sought. He also wanted the package to be offset by spending cuts elsewhere. So we'll be watching that fight closely. When asked, enough about that. There is a piece at the New York Post that we just don't have time to get to all the specifics of it, because it's quite a lengthy piece by the New York Post editorial board. But Biden is upping the odds that Israel will lose. For starters, they say, the Biden team still refuses to admit that Iran is pulling the strings of what Tehran calls the axis of resistance: Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza and the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and other Iranian proxies across the region. It basically boils down to this, because they give a really in-depth look. I would highly recommend that you find it at the New York Post. But even the liberals and moderates who worry about the consequences of an all-out IDF drive through Gaza understand that Israel must destroy Hamas after what it's done, lest it do it again. But Biden is tying Israel's arms behind its back, increasing the odds that Hamas will get away with its atrocities. That is their argument. Now, there is this real problem. We talked about it last week, this real divide in the Democrat Party, because you have this strain that is not, how do I put it politely, it is not necessarily pro-Israel. You know, you've seen we need to investigate more into that hospital bombing, those type of things. It's very odd. Well, then we heard that some Democrats are really sending, threats is not the right word, but saying to Democrats, you could lose our vote if you're this pro-Israel. Some even suggesting that Biden is too pro-Israel. Representative Jayapal was on Meet the Press this weekend, and I'm not going to give the whole quote, but this is what she said. I think we have to recognize that this is a double standard. The United States rightly called out Russia for its siege of Ukraine, rightly called out the attacks on the power infrastructure, the refusal to provide food and water and fuel to the Ukrainians, and we have to recognize that our credibility and our authority on the moral stage is greatly diminished if we do not also call out the siege that Israel is launching on Gaza, as violations of international law. We are losing credibility, and frankly, we are being isolated in the rest of the world. And that ties into what I was saying. The top progressives worry that Biden's actions on Israel will erode liberal support. We're going to talk about that when we come back. We do have some other things that we're going to discuss, some presidential issues, a few things here, if we get a chance, about the impeachment inquiry. Also, just some random stories. I do not have a guest this morning, starting because I wanted to have a little time to play catch up, because starting tomorrow we are jam-packed as we near Election Day. So I kind of saved this day in case there was a last-minute emergency interview or just so that we could have this conversation. So thank you for joining us. As always, you can contact me. You see the number on the bottom of the screen. I would love to have you weigh in. Right now, we do have to take a short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are talking about the real concern amongst top progressives that President Biden's actions on Israel will erode liberal support, which is a very telling comment about where, I guess, liberals' priorities are. A top progressive Democrat is cautioning President Biden that his support of Israel could cost him politically among some liberals. And this, again, was Representative Jayapal, who we mentioned earlier, who chairs the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She expressed concerns yesterday that if Biden doesn't recalibrate his approach, he could hemorrhage support. Quote, the president needs to be courageous on this issue so that we keep the unity within our country for the support of the incredible things he has done. It's kind of a veiled threat. This was on Meet the Press. She was asked about concerns of backlash from Muslim and Arab Americans and other progressives over his comments to date. And this is all because of his support for Israel. Quote, the American people are actually quite far away from where the president and even Congress, the majority of Congress, has been on Israel and Gaza. They support the right for Israel to defend itself, to exist, but they do not support a war crime exchange for another war crime. She underscored that she has been one of President Biden's biggest supporters and particularly lauded him for his domestic efforts to boost the working class. She also voiced, just as a side note, we're going to talk about him in just a moment, bewilderment at Representative Dean Phillips. He's the one that announced that he's primarying President Biden. Everyone's got the right to run, but I'm sorry, I have no idea what he is running on that is different from what President Biden is running on. Well, that's what he's been saying, really. It's more about the age. It really is. Now, Jayapal has bumped up against controversy in the past for her stance on Israel, and she doesn't back down. You've got to say, at the very least, they're pretty outspoken in their beliefs. As somebody who's been in the streets and participated in a lot of demonstrations, I want you to know that we have been fighting to make it clear that Israel is a racist state, she said during a progressive caucus or conference in Chicago back in July. Her remarks at the same time, in response to pro-Palestinian protesters who interrupted the conference, quote, that the Palestinian people deserve self-determination and autonomy, that the dream of a two-state solution is slipping away from us, that it does not even feel possible. She has since walked back her remarks. I clarified that what I meant is the existence of Israel is absolutely legitimate, and I think the world has come to see it as legitimate. However, there are racists within Netanyahu's government, and there are racist policies that the government has been carrying out. Wow. So the veiled threat to President Biden, if you want our support, you better walk back your support for Israel. Now, Jared Kushner, how am I doing on time? Oh, I'm doing good. Okay. We're covering a lot this morning. You remember Jared Kushner? Remember that name? He claimed that, and if you're not familiar, he's Donald Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor, actually, to the former president. He said Saudi Arabia is a safer place for Jews than college campuses in the U.S. And we're going to talk about this real threat on college campuses, something we've talked about extensively so far. Quote, one of the ironies is that as an American Jew, you're safer in Saudi Arabia right now than you are on a college campus like Columbia University. They allowed me to speak freely, Kushner said of the Saudis after returning from a trip to Saudi Arabia, where he spoke at a conference. Now, this article from the New York Post by Ryan King goes through and highlights, maybe not all, but many of the what we've seen in protests, threats, violence on college campuses, where at Cooper Union, you actually had Jewish students lock themselves or barricade themselves in the library because of the real threat. So that's Jared Kushner's opinion on it. Now, Cornell, this is what I mentioned earlier in the program that I wanted to highlight. Cornell is on alert after a horrendous anti-Semitic message threatened campus's Jewish community. This is right down the road at Cornell. And we saw last week where there was graffiti at Cornell that said words that I cannot repeat, but blank Israel, spray painted on campus. Cornell University was on high alert yesterday night after a series of, quote, horrendous anti-Semitic messages threatening the school's Jewish community were posted earlier on a public forum. The school notified law enforcement agencies and campus police, and they were taking precautions after a series of disturbing online posts made threats directed at Jewish students. And this is tough to hear. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'll give you an idea. Earlier today, a series of horrendous anti-Semitic messages threatening violence to our Jewish community and specifically naming 104 West, the home of the Center for Jewish Living, was posted on a website unaffiliated with Cornell. And that is from the university's president, Martha Pollack. Quote, threats of violence are absolutely intolerable, and we will work to ensure that the person or people who posted them are punished to the full extent of the law. Our immediate focus is on keeping the community safe. We will continue to prioritize that. Now, Cornell University Police Department said in a community alert for the entire city of Ithaca that, quote, evidence suggests the targeted locations were intentionally selected because of the perpetrator's bias. They said that they were made aware, the Cornell community was made aware of threats made against the 104 West, which houses the school's kosher and multicultural dining hall, and advised students and staff to avoid the building out of abundance of caution. We've seen that happen, for instance, in New York City. We had that article for you last week that said the Jewish community, stay in your homes on Saturday because of protests. Stay away from this building out of an abundance of caution. One of the posts on the website Greek Rank called for listen to this. It's heartbreaking. This is the threat, an idea. I'm just going to give you an idea of what the threat was. Called for students to follow Jewish students home and slit their throats. That's according to the student newspaper, the Cornell Sun. That's what they reported on Sunday. That's what the threat was. Despicable. But we've talked about in the past, colleges have become a breeding ground for anti-Semitism. Look at how many professors have been called out for their anti-Semitic speeches. For instance, the one professor at Cornell who's now on a leave of absence. I'm not going to read the whole piece for you. You can find it at New York Post. But we will not tolerate anti-Semitism at Cornell, said Pollack. That's, again, the president. During my time as president, I've repeatedly denounced bigotry and hatred, both on and off our campus. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, our governor, said in a statement that state police will, quote, take any steps needed to keep students safe. The disgusting and hateful posts on a message board about Jewish Cornell students is the latest in a series of concerning incidents on college campuses. So this to Jared Kushner's point, right? And then we talked about the graffiti already. And earlier this month, a professor called the Hamas attack, this is the one I was telling you about, exhilarating and energizing. Russell Rickford, an associate professor of history, is now on a leave of absence until at least the end of the semester. There has been a spike in anti-Semitism across the country and on college campuses since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Yes, there's the Jerusalem Post has I guess, what would you say, issued the warning that there's an alarming rise in anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses. This coming from the Jerusalem Post. Since the Hamas attack, Secure Community Networks, SCN, has logged 94 incidents of reports on college campuses. 15% of the 614 incidents it has logged across the country this month. October 2023 is on track to register more anti-Semitic incidents than any month ever recorded since the group's founding in 2004. Some of these incidents have received significant attention, such as the event at Cooper Union in New York City last week, when a protest claiming support for Palestine surrounded the school library and pounded on its glass windows, chanting, while a small group of Jewish students watched from inside. Again, it's a Secure Community Network CEO Michael Masters said in a statement, "The rise in incidents on our college campuses exposes the utterly insufficient response by a disturbing number of educational institutions in response to vocal support for foreign terror groups and rank anti-Semitism." And that's a very good point. I guess the colleges don't know what to do. First of all, they look at their students as cash cows, so they don't want to lose them. And they look at their faculty as very important. And so they let them get away with saying these vile things. And then they wonder why the students are becoming anti-Semitic. And this is nothing new. This is something we talked about before the attack on Gaza. Or the attack by Hamas, excuse me. We've talked about it extensively, the corruption, if you will, on college campuses. So we have a couple of other things we're going to get to. We're going to change up our topics when we come back. Maybe one last thing on this, and then we'll move on. As always, you can contact me. See the number on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to text, call, and leave a voicemail. I would love to hear from you and your opinion on the issues of the day. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We'll be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, thanks for joining us. A couple comments during break. Why would anyone be surprised that Democrats, liberals, and progressives don't believe in borders for Israel? They don't believe in borders for the United States. Also, another comment. When there are shootings and murders over here from violent attacks, Dems, libs, and progressives immediately call for gun control. Same thing happens in other countries. They blame the people, not the guns. Imagine that. So thank you for the comments. Keep them coming in. Just quickly, pro-Palestinian mobs forced a flight from Israel to Russia to be diverted and target the next airport where it landed as well. This breaking over the weekend. The White House said Sunday that it vigorously condemns the group of pro-Palestinian rioters in Russia who flooded an airport as they were shouting anti-Semitic chants and reportedly searching for passengers from a flight that departed from Tel Aviv, Israel. The United States vigorously condemns the anti-Semitic protests in Russia. The U.S. unequivocally stands with the entire Jewish community as we witness a worldwide surge in anti-Semitism. There is never any excuse or justification for anti-Semitism. That is White House National Security Council spokesperson Andreina Watson. Okay, now like I said, we're going to change up topics here. Oh my goodness, man. Time flies when we're having so much fun. Dean Phillips. This kind of fascinates me. And you know what? It's, you may say, who? I know, I talked about him earlier. We talked about him last week. Yes, it is kind of a who scenario, but he is running for president, primarying President Joe Biden. And what's interesting about him, he continues to say, really his opening speech when he announced was, I think Biden's done a great job. Which is kind of a weird, and even Representative Jay Paul saying, why, he's no different than Biden, why is he running? His candidacy, this is Dean Phillips, is built on perceived anxiety about Biden's age. Now, that's from the Washington Post, and I think it's interesting that they say perceived anxiety. Poll after poll shows there is real anxiety amongst the Democrat Party. But you see how they even have to lessen the blow by saying perceived anxiety. Now, I've talked to people, again, this is anecdotal, but that would have normally been Biden supporters, but these last few weeks and months really have drawn concern about his age and his mental well-being. And that's why Dean Phillips is running. And it's a little different than what you and I would say is, yeah, maybe the president, as leader of the free world, it draws some concerns, some of his statements, some of his actions. But he's saying it because he believes that it could lead to a President Trump. That's why he's primarying him, because he believes that Biden, has been doing so many things that have drawn concern that it could lead to Trump walking away with it. The little known Phillips, they even said in the Washington Post, elected to Congress in 2018, is a placeholder for the unease about Biden, who's 80, that exists among many Democrats. Phillip wants Democrats, even voters who like and respect the president, to use him to send a message that Biden should not seek a second term. The risk is that he weakens Biden rather than strengthens the Democrat Party heading into 2024. Phillips is open about his concerns that Biden might not be the strongest Democrat to go into a general election contest against former President Donald Trump or against a younger and fresher candidate should the Republican primaries produce a surprise. Other Democrats share those fears, but not so openly. The overwhelming percentage of them probably would support Biden in a general election against Trump, but how many younger voters or black and Hispanic men might stay home or even slide to Trump? It's far too early to know that, says the Washington Post. Now, there's been ideas that Gavin Newsom might run. So does Dean Phillips getting in the race open any doors for other people to jump in? I don't think so. But perhaps, and that was one of the things that Dean Phillips said last week is, well, maybe this will open up the playing field, get some more people in there. And of course, you do have, Cornel West is out there. You've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. There's still people in talks with the No Labels group of putting a third-party candidate up, such as Joe Manchin is a name that's being thrown around. So they go through and say some of the polling and about some of the concerns about Biden. But again, not hiding their contempt for the former president. The former president remains a threat to democracy. This is a Washington Post, and it is in clear legal jeopardy. The current makeup and position of the Republican Party provide the counter argument to those like Phillips who fear that nervousness about Biden's capacity to lead the country into his mid-80s would be a serious election handicap. Phillips will not be going head-to-head with Biden in New Hampshire early next year. New Hampshire will be in violation of Democrat Party rules, which set North Carolina as the first primary, although New Hampshire state law requires it to go first. In compliance with those rules and a nomination calendar that Biden largely dictated, the president will not be on the ballot in New Hampshire, but the Phillips candidacy will draw additional attention to the issue. So that's been kind of a brilliant strategic move that he got in New Hampshire, because that means Biden not on the ballot there, though they're already starting to write in to tell people to write in. But he could have a very good early showing. We're going to tell you a little bit more about him when we come back, so stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. You're watching Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Frank Acom. So we're talking about Democrat Representative Dean Phillips, who is primarying President Biden. He was on News Nation, and he keeps saying how much he likes Biden. It's really kind of interesting. So he's on News Nation, and he says, I'm a fan of Joe Biden. I admire him. I voted for his policies. Well, they said, but aren't you just a younger version of Biden? He said, no, I'm Dean Phillips. And yes, I'm a lot younger than President Biden. I was 3 years old when he became a senator. He's been serving our country for 50 years, and I admire that. But I'm also hearing it's time for a change. Yes, I voted for his policies as a member of the House Democrat leadership team. I helped distribute those policies and market those policies. That said, there was a massive, and then he got cut off by host Elizabeth Vargas. He said, let me start with affordability. It's a massive crisis in America right now, the cost of living. Now, he's not wrong. He's speaking to a lot of people there. People's mortgages are skyrocketing. Fuel is too expensive. Food is too expensive. Healthcare, if it's even obtainable, is double the price of anywhere in the world. Medicine, 3 times more than anywhere else in the world. We are falling behind. American middle-class, hardworking people are not being heard. They're angry, they're frustrated, and that is job one. We have a border crisis. We have crime in cities and chaos. We have a federal government that is run so ineffectively and so inefficiently, does not focus on customer service, doesn't use zero-based budgeting. We don't have term limits. So therefore, we have the same people making the same decisions and often the same mistake time and time again. I'm making a proposition for change. So I like that concept I like Biden. I voted for all of his policies, but those policies have led to inflation and border crisis. So this guy has taken some really interesting stances in his campaign so far that he really likes the president. And now I voted for all the policies that have led to all of these problems. But you don't hear Democrats, and this is kind of interesting from Dean Phillips, talk about crime in cities and chaos and the border. Interesting. So he's not taking this lightly. If you look at the polls, the border crisis and crime in cities is a major concern for a lot of people. And he's speaking to those people. It'll be interesting to see how far this goes, if he gets any fundraising or if he gets any traction whatsoever. Right now, not well known. But will that change? Dean Phillips. Okay. Another name that was thrown around, but he says he's not running, is California Governor Gavin Newsom. Before we go to break, I had to show you this. It is so weird. He was in China. And the RNC, the Republican National Committee, shared this video from his trip in China. Let me put it up on the screen. Okay, here he is. He's playing basketball with some kids. And he may have taken it too seriously. Watch this. What? Wow. Okay, I don't know why I felt the need to bring that news to you, but the short clip features the California governor showing off his ball handling skills before making a move towards the basket and running right through one of the children attempting to defend him. A spokesperson for Newsom's office said the incident happened while the governor was at Yuying School, a public school in Beijing, where he visited to see farm to school and other agricultural science programs in China. Anyway, on that note, let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you for joining us here on Frankly Speaking on Big Fox. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. According to Newsweek, Joe Biden's impeachment is looking more likely. That's according to new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. The reason we shifted to the impeachment inquiry stage on the president himself was because if, in fact, all the evidence leads to where we believe it will, that's very likely impeachable offenses, said Johnson. That's listed as a cause for impeachment in the Constitution, bribery and other crimes and misdemeanors. Bribery's listed there. It looks and smells a lot like that. We're going to follow the truth wherever it leads. We are going to engage in due process because, again, we're the rule of law party. I like that, rule of law party. I like that, Speaker Mike Johnson. I know people are getting anxious and they're getting restless and they just want somebody to be impeached. But we don't do that like the other team. We have to base it on the evidence. And that's a good point. That's a dig at how many times Democrats tried for impeachment on then President Donald Trump. He also said that they're pursuing the allegations very aggressively. This was on Fox News Channel over the weekend on Sunday Morning Futures. He said, we are going to follow the law and follow the Constitution. And I think you and I have suspicion of where that might lead. But we're going to let the evidence speak for itself. Am I looking forward to rolling that out? Or I am looking, and I look forward, to rolling that out over the coming days and weeks and letting the American people see exactly why we're taking the next steps and where it's headed. She also asked Maria Bartiromo, are you expecting to subpoena Hunter Biden? And he said, I'm looking at that. I think that desperate times call for desperate measures, and that perhaps is overdue. We have not made a full decision yet. I'm counseling with the attorneys involved on all of this to see what the contours of. I'm an attorney myself, so I speak the language. We're trying to move forward on some of this very aggressively. I think the American people are owed these answers. And I think our suspicions about all this, the evidence that we have gathered so far, as you know, is affirming what many of us feared may be the worst. And as Jamie Comer likes to say, bank records don't lie. We already have a lot of evidence. The dots are being connected, and we will see where it leads. Let's take our last break. We're going to talk about presidential issues when we come back. Unbelievable how fast this program went. Thank you so much for joining us. One last segment, and then we'll be back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Acom. Thank you so much for joining us. I didn't mention this at the beginning of the program, and I meant to. I apologize. But as you are probably aware by now, Mike Pence has dropped out of the 2024 race. He said to the American people, I say, this is not my time, but it is still your time. And he urged voters to choose a candidate who would appeal to, quote, the better angels of our nature and not only lead us to victory, but lead our nation back to civility. Now, Trump then called Mike Pence disloyal for not endorsing him. Everybody that leaves seems to be endorsing me, Trump said. I don't know about Mike Pence. He should endorse me. You know why? Because I had a great, successful presidency, and he was the vice president. He should endorse me. I chose him, made him vice president. But people in politics can be very disloyal. So calling Mike Pence disloyal, I don't see Mike Pence endorsing the former president. Pence even reflected yesterday, or during this conference, I don't think it was yesterday, I think it was Saturday, President Trump's words were reckless. They endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol. But the American people deserve to know that on that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice. I chose the Constitution, and I always will. So Trump calling him disloyal. Now, Nikki Haley at this forum at the Jewish GOP Jewish Summit ripped Trump as chaos with vendettas. But again, the media, and I don't know your thoughts on this. I don't really have a problem with Nikki Haley, but like I've said over and over again, it scares me when the media tells us who the best Republican candidate is, because the media doesn't want to see a Republican win. And Politico is reporting just that. The rise is real. Haley's breakout is jolting 2024's undercard race. Well, that's what's so interesting about it. They present it like it's a horse race, but what these people are still how many points behind her or DeSantis, behind the former president. It isn't just that Haley has navigated past, basically being counted out. It's at the timing of her rise, with several rivals fading, one newly out, meaning Mike Pence, and with increasingly urgent calls for a consolidation of the primary field, is already reshaping the GOP's long shot undercard race to overtake Donald Trump. Quote, she's breaking through at the right moment, said Mike Murphy. Everything else has been ridiculous preseason coverage, like baseball teams at summer training. I think it all starts now. So, Nikki Haley, a star. The media is telling us that it's probably the best chance we have to beat Biden. Speaking of Trump, the judge, we are out of time. Judge has reinstated the gag order in Trump's federal election case. The order prohibited Trump from targeting the special counsel prosecuting his case or witnesses who might be called to testify about his efforts to upend his election loss. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan imposed a gag order at the Justice Department's request. She did temporarily lift it on October 20th after Trump's lawyers appealed. And finally, there is a piece going into if you remember at the beginning of the show, I read some comments from over the weekend about energy costs. We don't have time to get to this, but Consumer Group exposes the costs of Biden administration's war on home appliances. You can find this for yourself at Fox Business. A very interesting piece that gives you more specifics. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Tomorrow on the program, we'll be joined by Corning Mayor Bill Bolin, so don't miss that. I can't wait. So please join us starting at 7 a.m. This has been Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV Big Fox. Have a great day, everyone.